Well, I grew up in a happy humanist household. I don't think my parents would have described themselves as humanists explicitly, but it was clear that those were the values that they were bringing me up in. I like to say that I was raised on Shakespeare, Sagan, and Star Trek. Those were the sort of touchstones in my family life. And I remember going to the planetarium with my grandfather and marveling about the mystery of the universe, and reading science fiction novels and watching Star Trek and imagining a better future for humankind. And never in my imagination was there a God. Never really in my life. I kind of flirted with it as a teenager, but it was never a serious thing for me. It was clear to me from my upbringing that the natural world was enough and that we didn't need God to explain anything. But I did go to a religious high school, I guess what we call a middle school and a high school in the United States. And I was in the choir, and I sang in religious services very frequently. I was around religious people a lot. And although it was a form of British Christianity that's much lighter and less evangelical, less conservative than American strains of Christianity sometimes are, a sort of very nice Anglicanism. I certainly did recognize, particularly through my teenage years, that other people believed very strongly in things that I had never considered reasonable to believe in. And I started to get into debates with people, with people at the Christian Union and things like that. And that continued into my college years when I went to Cambridge and continued to go. I went to Bible study classes and asked difficult questions, and finally found the Humanist Manifestos, which are what made me self-identify as a humanist, because I went through this sort of process during my teenage years at college when I investigated religious traditions. I read the Bible, I read the Quran, I read the Bhagavad Gita and other things to try and see whether there might be any truth there. Because I'd always loved myths and fantasy stories and things like that. I just thought this would be an interesting thing to do to expand my education. And luckily, I found the Humanist Manifestos. And when I read those, I think particularly the second one, I realized that that was what I really believed, that I was committed to reason, compassion for all humanity, and hope for the future. And I've never felt that any argument or experience has provided any reason to relinquish those values. So I work right now with an initiative called the Humanist Community Project, which is something the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard put together to try and bring all the best insights about community building from all the humanist groups that are popping up around the country, humanist, atheist, skeptics groups, meetup groups, pub lunches, people who are trying to build physical community centers, things like that, to try and bring the wisdom together into one place so that we can share what's working and explore different models for our communities. And I was drawn to work on that because partly of my experience growing up as a choir boy in religious spaces, which often, even though I didn't believe in the tenets that I was singing about or that people were sermonizing about, I found quite interesting. I didn't really have a negative experience with religion. I quite liked going to church. I thought it was, I liked the sense of fellowship and companionship that people seem to have with each other. I liked the interesting talks, like often the sermons were quite intellectually stimulating. I liked the fact that they talked about values, about what people care about and what people are most committed to. And when I came to the United States and I started getting more involved in atheist activism, partly because of this issue of the discrimination against atheists in this country, which I'd never experienced in England, and that just shocked me. The first time I realized that there were people who were worried about being openly atheist because they think they might lose their job, for example, it shocked me so much that it made me want to get more involved in this movement. And when I did get more involved, I saw that we are a movement that is full of brilliant intellectual figures, people who are fantastic debaters and write brilliant books, and we love to get around the table and debate and argue and debunk and things like that, which I absolutely love. But I missed an aspect of the community building around common shared values that the experience of religious communities I'd had seemed to provide. And so I thought that one thing that might be valuable was to look into ways of bringing non-religious people together around the positive values that they share with each other, so that they can talk about, for example, their commitment to social justice and equality for all people, their commitment to science and reason as a positive in and of itself, not just as a sort of reflection of their lack of faith. And the more I've thought about that idea and the more I've read on that idea, the more I think it's essential that humanists and non-religious people come together to build communities, physical communities. Because every social movement, and I view the free-thinking movement as potentially a social movement with extraordinary power to change the face of America, every social movement has had physical spaces in which they coalesce and form activist blocks around. So, for example, during the civil rights movement, many churches formed that function. During the gay rights movement, many gay bars and bookshops and things like that formed that function. People need spaces in which they can physically coalesce to share and explore and deepen their commitment to a set of values so that then they can be galvanized to action. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about today, one of the things I think is really important, is that Susan Jacoby said in one of her articles that the number of non-religious people in America has recently, over the past few decades, increased enormously, but their political and social power has not increased very significantly. And I think part of the reason for that is that we are, as a movement, not yet organizing. And I thought that the Reason Rally was really a first step towards a more organized social movement that might push our values more towards the center of the public discussion. Well, as a gay man, I know how much of a struggle it can be to tell people something about yourself that you think they might react badly to. I struggled for 10 years before I was able to come out of that closet. And I know from that any closet that makes you lie about who you are and what you believe in is too small for anyone to live in. So I want to say it's okay to be an atheist. It's okay to be a humanist. In fact, it's more than okay. Because the values that you hold as a free-thinking individual, a commitment to reason, a commitment to compassion for all human people, a commitment to hope for the future, that we can, working together, make a better world for humankind, those values are the highest principles any human being can hold. So it's okay to be an atheist and get your ass out of that closet.